He's also doing a program at Gallery West on Friday night where Johnny Mollica's art is also on display. And so lots of good opportunities to learn more about the Allman Brothers. Last thing I'll say, Bob says that part of Duane's genius was in creating musical conversations. So at this point, let me turn it over to Karla and Bob to get us started, and I hope that we'll all be able to join into conversation about this topic and others. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Laura.
Oh, I'm just thinking they may hear us a little better if we go back and forth. Yes. Well, let's piggyback on the word conversation. I read your book, and if I may just sort of share, there are a lot of things about the Allman Brothers that I did not know and that I have not experienced. I've already shared that this evening. And I say that, for instance, I was here from 1980 to 1994. I've never been to the big house. It's on my list. I have passed Rose Hill Cemetery, I don't know how many times. I've never gone and had that experience of visiting their graves. That's on my list. There were collaborations that you shared in your book. I had no idea. Aretha Franklin, Eric Clapton, and so many others. And you also, he sent me his playlist so that I could listen to some of the music. All of these songs, I will say some I was familiar with, some I was not. And I did not attribute them to the Allman Brothers. So it was eye-opening, and it was really a learning experience, but I could hear what you noted in the book about a conversation of the musicians. If you will sort of use that as a jumping point to talk about how important that was to the Allman Brothers.
Karla, this is new. I don't know how new this is to this group at all. So, for some of y'all, the hardcores over here, my homies over here, this may be new, but it's just said in a slightly different way. And I hearken back to this. For me, music is a conversation. The ultimate, for Bob. So as a listener, as a human being, I sought music, or I sought community in music, or I sought the common experience in music. Very humanities kind of focused here in terms of when you play music with other people, and this is true from me cranking out the old Them song or Van Morrison's song Gloria, 3 chords and the truth, to trying to do something like what the Allman Brothers Band do. My goal in playing music, and I think a lot of musicians, is rising up, coming together, making something more than what it is you can do all by yourself. When you add the conversational aspect to it, it goes beyond recording hits. And Paul's in here. Where's Paul? I saw him. He's over there somewhere. There he is. But he talks a lot about this. Over the years, I've read a lot of what Paul said as I'm piecing this narrative together. And you talk about being a cover band or being a studio band, you're very limited in your ability to have a conversation. The Allman Brothers are very much it is a jazz aesthetic, really from the beginning. And what's going on, I think, conversationally, beyond just the musicians talking to each other. I saw it happen. Those of y'all who saw the big Band of Brothers a couple weeks ago, I saw a couple. J-Mo did it almost all night. He kept answering other people. And if you don't see that or pay attention to it, if you don't see it in isolation, you might not hear it as much. But that's what those guys are doing, those 6 guys in particular. They're having a conversation. And the conversation is their influences coming out in their own way and in the unique way that the other 5 musicians bring that out of them. And going back to the humanities, it is a conversation. Music is a conversation. It's an arc of conversation. We add elements to it from our own experiences and from our own lives. What is very remarkable about this story is what virtuosos they were from the very beginning. And again, I think I have this quote from Paul. Paul, I'm not picking on you. I just saw you and it occurred to me. But there's a quote he said that is I can't imagine any other 6 guys than those guys doing this. And this is Paul was a guy who played with many of those dudes beforehand, and when you saw it come together, and those of you in this room who were here when that happened, it was a life-changing thing. And people say it. It's very, very, very true of their experience. So the conversation, and I'll arc it to, they recorded, well, I guess they didn't record any of their first two, they didn't record their first two records here. They certainly were working on Idlewild South here when they went down to Miami. And if you listen to the difference between their first two records and At Fillmore East, which they released in 1971, the difference to me is the extent of the musical conversation. You can hear it, and listeners heard it too and bought it, and we are all here today simply because of that. Because this whole thing, this Capricorn, the Macon music industry, it all starts with Duane and the Allman Brothers Band.
Forgive me if I'm just, I say it's old age, but things come to me and I just have to throw them out there when they come.
Jazz, baby.
Okay, oh,
Jazz.
that's right, jazz. Ruth Knox. I don't know if you remember this. And as I read his book and I started listening to more and more of the Allman Brothers music, I could not help but reflect on Atlanta Symphony. It was actually my first humanities event. And Gregg Allman, Chuck Lavelle, and Robert Duffy. We were sitting next to each other. And I'm like, what a treasure. It's one of those things that has passed us by, and now you realize just how special that was. And I'm just curious, how did you come to this book? And I know that you were, what was it, I was a part of that too, the membership, where you order the music, you know, and you, on your honor, you're gonna pay.
Yes.
But so you used to order Allman Brothers music.
I ordered, yeah, so, and if this is in the preface, I'll say it very quickly. Columbia House. It wasn't Columbia House, though, because BMG had the better deal, and you could more easily get the better deal from them. And it's 13 CDs for a penny. My boy Steve Marshall's nodding over there. So I had this habit of and any of us college in the 90s, I know a lot of us did this. I would go through the thing and I would just buy greatest hits, because I figured that's going to give me the best sort of bang for my buck. I'll know if I like the band. And I got Decade of Hits, which I'm assuming Kirk worked on. I don't know, but it was this one CD sampler of a two CD or two set album Capricorn had released after the band broke up, or as they were. And it was blue denim cover. It wasn't all that fancy or anything, but I swear to God, it parted my hair. It was just like the heavens opened up, and it was like, this is no lie. God said, this is it. This is what I want you to listen to. And it does. I'm gonna get a little metaphysical here, but it does connect me to the world as it goes out. When I listen to it, when I play it, when I see it live, I'm not BSing you guys when I say that. It matters a lot. So I guess that was your question, was really how did I come to it? The coming to the book is literally, and it impacts particularly Kirk and John over here, because they published for a long time Hitting the Note magazine. And when you're an Allman Brothers fan, that was their sort of connection to the early days in the story, before the big house was what it was. Macon was, I can't give enough credit really to Kirk and Kirsten, what Macon was and how it looked at this part of its past. It was a forgotten part of it. One reason you didn't know all this, right, is because everybody turned their backs on this when Capricorn folded. Honestly, I don't know when it happened, y'all. Y'all could educate me on that. But I know that that's not the case anymore. So Hitting the Note magazine ran a review of the second actually biography of the band, called Midnight Riders, by Scott Freeman, who was a journalist. And the band hated it because it wasn't very nice. He wrote a book when the band was broken up and they weren't sure really what their legacy was going to be, and there was a lot of negativity in that book, particularly when they broke up and the money problems and all that. It just was really left unsettled. So this review comes through by a historian named Ken Hay, who had done a documentary on the band in the 70s. And I reached out to him a couple of times, never made contact. But his review basically said, the book's a good story, but it doesn't answer the why. Which is at the fundamental question of the humanities. It's not that something happened, but why does it happen? How does it happen? Why does it matter? All those things. It's change over time. There's a lot of contingencies when you study history. And I remember, this was 95 when it came out, and I remember going, I wonder if I could do that. Could I answer the why? Because I'd already been spending about 2-3 years at that point thinking about why the Allman Brothers knocked my socks off. And I was listening to him all the time, and no shit, Kirk West's name was in every single thing I purchased. I wrote him a note in the 90s. I was like, Jesus Christ, dude, everything I'm listening to is there. So there was this connection still. The band was back on the road, and they were playing at a level that they hadn't reached in a long time, and I jumped on the bus. And when I jumped on the bus, I never jumped off. It has enriched my life. I said this last night at Mercer to Doug. Music, the pursuit thereof, the discussion with my friends, and figuring out this band for myself to tell a story about why I think they're remarkable. There's a lot of hubris in a story like that. I get that. This is really, I'm going to say this, if you don't like it, I am crushed, I promise you. But I didn't really write it as much for you as I did for me, and I like it okay. And I did just reread it last week in order to prep for my talk for Mercer yesterday, because I hadn't done that in a long time. Every typo in there, you're going to blame University Press of Florida. I'm really pissed about that, I'm just going to say. But all to say, that was it. And I've been working in the world of history, museums, of the public humanities. So I've watched how stories like this grab the attention of audiences and of people. And I can tell within the story, because I've been doing this for years, right? I can talk about race. I can talk about equality. I can talk about the challenges and what is the world going on. And I think it's vital. I think it's vital to understanding the Allman Brothers story. And this is nothing against any other book that's been out there, but the other books that are out there are very this, and this happened. And there's not a lot of contextual understanding or anything. And again, that's how histories are written. My book comes out of all of that, and I give a tremendous amount of credit to the work Scott Freeman did, and Tom Nolan did, and Alan Paul, of course, did. Because without their work, I couldn't have done it. But I want to get back to the humanities, and I'm going to pass the mic. Because one thing that really helped me a lot was the National Endowment for the Humanities, which is a federal agency of about $140 million. Minuscule. They're asking, I think it's less than $1 from every American. That money that they take in comes out into the states. That's not a bunch of federal agencies hoarding money. That comes back out. And one project that your tax dollars funded through the humanities was to digitize all of the college newspapers from the era that I studied. And that includes The Great Speckled Bird, which was the first rag that picked up on the Allman Brothers in May of 1969. So I had access to this material through this world that I lived in, and I started to understand this professional world of museums and historical societies and sites. And this is my 26th year coming to Macon and visiting. And I go by and see the Big House folks, check that. I go to Rose Hill. I eat at the H&H, and now Big Mike's will be on my regular radar at this point. But the story that I've studied is actually outside of here. This is like home base. There's not a lot of material here, so a little bit of a ramble. But
That's
there you go.
That's all right. And if I can add the fact that I have eaten at the H&H, so I can say I can check that one off. I can check that one off. You talked a lot about Macon just now. So, if you will share, how did that come to be, and the significance of the Allman Brothers deciding that this would be home base?
And so I'm gonna beg forgiveness for this is what they say, what they teach you when you speak in front of native cultures. You're supposed to apologize to the ancestors for talking about their history. So for those of y'all who lived here during this, I'm gonna apologize now if I miss anything that you misremember. But I'm just gonna ask that you give me, I just said it that way, didn't I? Oops. But I'm gonna ask that you give me some license as I say this. This is the same thing I say when I talk about civil rights history. I talk about World War II history. And I may get a couple things that you think are different or whatever we can discuss later. So Phil Walden, it lives here. Phil has built a pretty successful booking agency with Otis Redding. He's fixing to open the studio. We're in it. Excuse me. He's fixing to open the studio with Otis, and Otis dies in a plane crash. 1968, there's a problem at the National Association of Television and Radio Announcers, the black professional organization, the black talent, the radio DJs, the jocks and stuff like that, and record labels. And there is a big issue in Miami, of all things. And there's a lot of threats from African Americans to the white label executives. And Jerry Wexler is burned in effigy. He has to leave undercover. He's afraid he's going to get hurt. Walden, Phil ends up leaving, but comes back and decides, I'm going to get into white rock and roll. That's a true story. I'm not lying about that. Black rock and roll was starting to become a problem. Phil was looking for a way to do that when he heard Duane Allman. And he hears Duane on, not on Aretha yet, we're not there yet, but it's on Hey Jude with Wilson Pickett. And that's also the song that J-Mo hears when he's here waiting for Phil to put his band together. J-Mo's the only one who shows up to serve in the Capricorn rhythm section, or at least that's what he says, but no one else really does. J-Mo ends up in Muscle Shoals. And they go to Jacksonville. So I was like, Jim, this is Jim, right? Jim said, this is where the story begins. I was like, no, the story begins in Jacksonville, Florida. But they come up here really within about a month. And I just pieced this together. It's not in the book. I'm disappointed. I've been in the house where they played. Kirk, you are absolutely right. I better not say any more. We will talk off mic. I'm recording for my thing. But so the bottom line is, Dickie shot a gun, and the cops show up. And there is a mound of marijuana on the table. I heard Linda Oakley telling this story on the radio, and Dickie tried to say, "Oh, look, we just got some clippings from." It was pretty quick thinking, I think. So they were trying to get it off the table. But according to Linda, she said the attorneys basically said, "Just get out of Dodge," and so they were already forming and ready to come up here. I've always thought it was weird, and I'll give another nod to Paul because, and I put this in the book. Duane had already lived under the watchful eye of the record company in L.A. So Duane had, if you know the story, he'd come back from L.A., had been in a band with Paul, and they were a great band, but a really crappy studio band because of their producer. Am I about right? You were a great studio band, but the output wasn't what y'all did. And that's very true when you can hear it.
Southern rock was a brand new thing.
There you go.
The first Southern rock band.
There, and so I just totally lost my
How they
train of thought.
ended up here in Macon.
So they move up here in Macon and settle on College Street. It's basically they're here because this is where Walden is, and I don't know, and some of y'all might know whether or not there was discussion of them coming up here beforehand, but I know that they had to get the hell out of Dodge. That's the story that I heard, and it's why they ended up coming up here so quickly. And this becomes, and it is odd, like this little town, which is hell of a lot smaller than Jacksonville where they were, but this is one of a number. This story, the Southern Rock story, is small Southern towns. It's not rural South like we think about. It's non-urban. And I think that's really important. When you think about the stories of the music industry in the American South of this era, it's happening in and around towns that have a decent federal presence around there. Daytona Beach has a military base. They've got NASA right there. Jacksonville has several Navy bases. Muscle Shoals has the TVA right up the road. You've got Huntsville. You got a military base here in Macon. These small towns are where the action is happening. And in all honesty, it's because the federal government is investing in southern communities that are bringing people in and around. I don't think that's an insignificant story. Because prior to this happening here, all these groups had to leave, and the individuals had to leave the South, which is what Duane did with Mr. Hornsby right here, and several others did. That was Duane's third attempt. He'd already been in New York and failed. Been in New York and failed. He failed in Nashville, then he failed in L.A. If this didn't work, what would have happened? So Macon, there's something magical about this place. I know that y'all who live within it, there's also some frustration. I call it mushroom magic. It's just my own little term. But I think the band was allowed to be the band that they became because they had this home base in this town. And I think when they started having problems, and I'm not going any further than this, I think that's when they lost those connections to home. And I think that happens to a lot of musicians who get successful, right? They were still incredibly successful as musicians, but from a personal standpoint, once, and it's not just Duane's death, and it's not just Barry's death, it's success, hubris, and everything that comes with that. Drug and alcohol problems, I would say young men suffering from grief, PTSD, all of these possible things for staying on the road and running so hard there. But what's crazy is this little flower, this little seed that got planted, kind of grows despite all of that from here.
Continues. It continues.
Yes.
I want to talk about how the band continued after Duane's death with his vision, but since we're in Macon, Georgia, we are still in the South. And so you've got this band, and they have one black member, which means that if they hit the road, they're going to run into some trouble. So one of the stories that I read, they were in a restaurant, and somebody said something, or I guess was roughing or trying to rough up J-Mo, and was it Duane?
It was Dickie.
Dickie. Whoever that person was ended up on the floor.
Punch him out.
And there was not a knife, but a fork involved, and left him on the floor. But they were truly a family. It didn't matter the skin color.
I mean, listen, I think that's one of the more remarkable parts of this story, and it's one I think we often underplay, simply because the principals themselves often underplay the story. The facts. So I'm gonna do a little moment of personal privilege. Anybody who knows me has seen me already drop this name that I dropped. But I got called an observant MFer by J-Mo last week. Now I want you guys to laugh at that. I got called an MFer, an observant MFer, by a jazz man. And I just cannot consider, I can't believe nobody giggled at that, because I thought it was funny as shit. Thank you, Laura, thank you. But by saying it, it meant a lot. And one of the things he was talking about, though, was how I spoke about race in music in particular. So, you know, what Duane did from the beginning, Gregg too, in Daytona Beach, is it was music. And it didn't matter what you looked like. And you know, a lot of us say that. The Muscle Shoals guys, right? There's no, the Stax guys will say, there was no race in the studio, Muscle Shoals, no race. That's BS, 100% BS, because it doesn't. You can't turn those things on and off. But when you are playing music, you are crossing, no matter what's going on. If you're letting yourself go, you're crossing boundaries, you're having that shared conversation and everything else. So they were in integrated bands in Jacksonville and Daytona Beach, Florida. They were going to the black side of town to buy records and to play. Duane and Gregg were. Floyd Miles, a good friend of theirs, says we were pretty bonded together because they were hippies and I was black, and that's how it went. So accepting and being in a band with J-Mo, touring with J-Mo, playing black music unapologetically. It wasn't Pat Boone, we talked about this, right? It wasn't Tutti Frutti Pat Boone, right? It was, this sounds real. And I will say, those were J-Mo's words I put in the book that said that. Like, these are white folk who can pull it off without making it a put on. And so that's there. And then you add the element of you are in a car, you're in buses, you're traveling around, hippies. The story about the Jackson, the story she's talking about, I think happened in Ohio. Tom Doucette told it, where J-Mo started getting some crap and Dickie punched the guy out, you know. There's another story that I recounted last night about them refusing to let him play in Merritt Island, Florida, and the band and roadies all said, no, he's playing, and basically intimidated the promoter into making sure he goes on stage. When they got arrested in Jackson, Mississippi, which was only a week after Fillmore East was recorded, all of them got put in a segregated part of the jail. I can only imagine how J-Mo must have felt in that situation, and thank God the other guys went in the black part of the jail, honestly, because even in 1971, it's not a good idea to be traveling around with a bunch of hippies in a pharmacopoeia like they were, you know, and doing it. So they respected, listen, and when Barry Oakley dies, they had Lamar Williams Jr., that's on my mind, Lamar Sr. on bass, so they end up with two black musicians at the time when they're the most popular band in the land. So I said to you before, and I've said to a certain extent in the book, I do think they changed the South. I do think they changed attitudes about the South. I do think that they were a different kind of civil rights crusader, not necessarily, you know, right, exactly, and they all say that, but I do think that the fact of accepting J-Mo and doing the music that they did that was so unapologetically part of African American culture and this merging of cultures here. I think it's a really, really, really big deal.
One of the other things that struck me, though, aside from J-Mo being the only black in the band, the fact that they had the long hair. Now, see, I told you earlier, I'm not sure if I'm going to share with everybody else what year I was born, but I'm familiar with hippies and the long hair. But I did not realize that being somebody with long hair was also not a good thing when you're traveling in the South during those times.
Yeah, so, the number one story is the reason we have Hey Jude, which is the reason Duane breaks out, the reason Phil Walden signs him, the reason we are here tonight, was because they were in Muscle Shoals, and it was a day gig for the musicians. So they broke to go to dinner. Duane was a hippie. Wilson Pickett was a very, very dark black man who looked kind of mean. And so, as Jimmy Johnson explains it, the hippies got as much crap as the black guys going out. We couldn't go out, so they stayed behind. And the magic happens, God knows what. But they come back, they work on the Hey Jude arrangement, they record this massive hit. J-Mo hears it, Phil Walden hears it, and we're all here. So that's literally indicative of the story about what that was like. You mentioned the long hair. I had a friend of mine edit this. I used my stimulus money. There we go again. I paid a friend of mine to go through and edit, and she was really good, like forcing me to hone in on some arguments and to say a few things. And one of the things she kept marking was the long hair. So I'm going to nerd out here. She's a gender historian, so she pays attention to that. And I wrote her back and I said, Sue, I don't have a lot to say about this. Like, I don't understand it. I don't really. And she wrote me back and she goes, again, she's a gender historian. She says, when you're a hammer, everything's a nail. It's okay. Somebody else can address it. But yes, the long hair was new. And to see men with long hair running around with a black dude was really some off the wall crap in this little town. And some of y'all were here when this broke, or at least were here shortly after. The story is they used to slow down on College Street when they would sit outside smoking weed or doing whatever to stare at the hippies as they drove by. I'm up by the McDuffie Center now. It's up there now.
I want to, somebody who met us out as we were talking out in that lobby area talked about perseverance. You talked about goal setting and having a vision and not giving up on that vision. Failure after failure after failure. This is the way we need to make it work, and that is what Duane did. I did not know about the fact that this was family. This wasn't just a band. Yeah, I've been in a band, and we were a family, but not like this. Not to the fact that, to the point of living together and communing together and being able to have conversations, right, and just sort of knowing each other. So after those failures, and I'm speaking of the recorded albums, they didn't work for them.
Right.
For the band did not have success when it came to recorded albums in the studio. So this gets us to Fillmore East.
And this took me time. I'm going to talk to my fellow fans here too in particular, but I struggled when it was a friend of mine. So I wrote a 500-page dissertation, which was basically everything I could think of, and I put it down, and I got my degree, got my PhD in 2018. And I thought, okay, I'm just going to rip around, I'll get it done and turn it in. And I realized I had to go from 144,000 to 85,000 words. I had to cut like 60% or 40. It was ridiculous. It was good though. The book is much better for it. And when I was working on it, I just lost my train of thought again. What was the question? Yep, keep going.
And going to Fillmore East.
Fillmore East, thank you. So, buddy mine, I'm so sorry, y'all. I'm completely sober, by the way. I have had 2 beers, but I'm not drunk, promise. And I'm not stoned. Okay, so get a little nervous sometimes thinking about it. So here's the issue. The way that bands made money was twofold. You sold records or you worked as a touring band. You've done this. You understand what that grind of the touring life is. In the 60s, late 60s, early 70s, you put out a record that should catch wind and then you can kind of afford to, go. But you have to sell a record.
Right.
It has to sell. So they put their first record out, the Allman Brothers Band. They were only together, 6 months? No, 5 months. Sounds a little bit half-baked. I think it's a wonderful record, but it doesn't sell. They put all the stops out for Idlewild South the next year. It's the record that Tom Dowd produces. Duane's recording Layla as he's recording that record. And it seems to me, I'm going to say that Idlewild South should have broke through. Just given what they were trying to do. I don't know why they didn't issue Midnight Rider as a single. Revival and Every Hungry Woman. So they didn't even, not Every Hungry Woman, Leave My Blues at Home. To my ears, I don't think they picked the right songs. But either way, they didn't break through. And they were all really disappointed.
But they didn't give up.
They didn't give up. So here's the point that I was getting at. So live albums are at the time, two things. It can be an old artist sort of reintroducing himself or herself. Johnny Cash's Folsom and San Quentin records are like that. Or you can do like a sort of an oldie but goodie set. Muddy Waters at Newport or something like that. The Allman Brothers said, no, we're going to record this next record live, which they did. They recorded live in the studio, but we're going to go ahead and do it in front of an audience, and we're going to do it in front of the biggest audience in rock, which is Fillmore East. And so basically, the bottom line was, I think they were done. If they hadn't broken through, some other people could say maybe Walden would have kept them on the road or whatnot, but everything was riding on the success of that record. And the decision really was, and if you read the reviews of the early records, almost anybody who had seen them live mentions that the records are just not right. And when you find the At Fillmore East reviews, when they do it, anybody who had seen them live says, this is the best thing we're going to get. There's nothing better unless you're going to get an encore and be able to meet the band and all this. So basically, it captured exactly what everybody said. The thing that always gets me is 3 failures, big time, has this contract, isn't doing well, and the option is we're going all out. We're literally going to record 4 shows. We're going to play our asses off, and we're going to take our chances. And they literally release a record 78 minutes with not a single overdub on it. That's 2 patches. They patched 2 versions of You Don't Love Me together, and they took out the harmonica solo in Stormy Monday. Everything else is note freaking perfect.
Now the other thing that to be seemed to pump them or to give them energy were those audience, the live. So not only did they do it live, but they had an audience. And Duane had said, if I'm remembering, he projected. He says, "I'm going to play that there."
Yes,
Remember that?
it is one of my favorite stories in there. So in December of '68, January of '69, Duane is at Fillmore East. He's up in the balcony with Jimmy Johnson from one of the Swampers. He's from at that point, I think they're still at Fame. And Johnny Winter's playing. And Johnny Winter is a foil for Duane throughout his life. And that's in my book, because he just kept coming up. Everybody was comparing Duane Allman to Johnny Winter. And I like Johnny Winter and everything, but there's just like zero comparison to me between the two, right? So what's interesting is Duane is seems to me to be a very lovely individual, very kind, very, very outgoing, but he does have a tiny bit of an ego when it comes to other guitar players. So his comment to Jimmy Johnson is, Johnny's good, but I can cut him. I love any artist who says I can cut. That term is just awesome. I can cut him. By this time next year, I will be on that stage playing. And he was on that stage playing by December of 1969, opening for Blood, Sweat, and Tears. I think Appaloosa. They got booed off the stage on their first Fillmore gig, but returned immediately. Bill Graham had them Fillmore East and West in less than a month. 2 weeks in Fillmore West, actually.
You've mentioned his name several times, Phil Walden. I had the opportunity to meet, or have an audience, I should say, with him when I was in college. And it's one of those things that when you're in college, you really don't recognize or value what has happened. Now, when I'm reading this book, I'm like, oh my gosh, same Paul Hornsby. We go back, and I told him tonight, I'm like, I did not realize that you actually toured with Duane Allman and Allman Brothers. So it's one of those kind of pinch pinch me moments, you know, when you're reading and it all is coming to life for you. Talk about the significance of Phil Walden and Wexler. And I also read that Walden believed in them and their vision so much that he put mortgaged his house or money. He sacrificed.
Yes. The comment it leads off a chapter says, I mortgaged everything for this. I believed in it that much. So Phil Walden's a complex character, as is just about everybody in this story, and as is just about everybody in this room, right? Phil Walden was I call him an impresario. In fact, I think I had to go through, if there's more than one time I used that in the book, it was a mistake, because I used it a bunch in early drafts, and I kept running into it. But, you know, this was a guy who, as a teenager, started booking bands as a high schooler. Starts his talent agency, and that's, you know, where Otis Redding is part of, and then that's how he ends up meeting J-Mo, or J-Mo ends up in the orbit there. But Walden has this vision, and he wants to get into white rock and roll. He has said that, and he's got an ear for it for sure, right? He hears Duane Allman on Hey Jude and says, I'm gonna do this. Walden nurtured that band. In fact, in my book, the issues that Walden had with them, that in particular, Scott Freeman really did a good job unpacking what that mess is. But that story, I had to avoid it in my book, because I stopped when Barry Oakley dies, when Linda got kicked out of the big house, because I didn't want to delve into all of that drugs and money and everything else. But Phil's issue is the issue of a lot of people. He overextended himself. I think Phil had I know he had a predilection for cocaine and booze, and like a lot of people in the 70s, and that got them in a hell of a lot of trouble. I think the final thing, and this is one of those unfortunate things about the music industry in general. The band trusted him, and I think bands know better than to do that now, sign over this full trust. But the issue really is Phil Walden was their manager, he was their booking agent, he was their record label, he was their publisher of their music. Jerry Wexler, his partner in this endeavor, was co-owner of Capricorn, which was distributed by Atlantic, where Wexler was an Atlantic executive. There's a lot of issues in this story. And it all comes to a head when the money starts running out. But, there was something about Phil Walden, his ability to build this music empire down here. And without Phil Walden and his belief in Duane and his belief in the band, and I'll tell you the biggest thing, I think more than anything, is he kept them in the South. That's very true. I've said that, and those guys say that repeatedly. The other one was, and I think this is a little bit undersold sometimes, so At Fillmore East was originally going to be a single record. I actually, when I spell it out, I spell how it could be, because I had to sit and figure it out a little bit. And Walden goes to Jerry Wexler and says, well, we're going to put out a double album, and we're going to sell it for a single album price, which of course is going to cost money. And Wexler understands it. And that was Walden's genius to do that. And what Walden did, though, is he cut a publishing deal on Gregg's songs and Dickie's songs on that album. So Gregg and Dickie are getting less money as the songwriters, without them even understanding that. So that's where the issues start to come up. When you start delving into that money thing, man, it's just ugly and messy and dirty. And it does take away from, the joy of the story. But I mean, we're here because of that. We're here because of all.
One of the other things, one of the other joys, and I was going to use this, every now and then I'll try to be a comedian. And I was going to open by saying, I have been in almond joy reading your book and listening to their music. I haven't written right here, but I forgot. This is the age thing. But one of the things I did observe, and I guess I don't know all the whys, but there were some members of the band who were in, and then they would be out, and then they would be in again, over a period of time. Like, I think J-Mo was out for a while.
He was the only one. Oh, well, then Dickie was out.
Yeah, so I saw like some reappearances, and I'm like, okay, but this is the true family.
Yeah, Kirk, I'm sure, can unfold that story, and I'm sure some other folks can, but sometime in '81, I never could pin down the date, J-Mo was kicked out of the band. They recorded one record, stayed on the road a bit after that, and then they just broke up for good. And then J-Mo joined again in '89. So the four original survivors were together from '89 to 2000. Then they parted ways with Dickie Betts. I put that in the book. I mean, anybody who knows the story knows there's a lot more to that story than what just showed up. But Dickie and the band parted ways in 2000. And then from 2001 to 2014, Warren Haynes came back. You are correct. So you are correct. People do plug back in. You are, good job. Yeah, so '89, Haynes had come in. He left in '97. Alan Woody had just passed away, his partner in the band, in two bands. And so Haynes comes back and really anchors that lineup with Derek Trucks and the three originals at that point. So the longest standing Allman Brothers band had only three originals in it. That longest standing lineup from 2001 to 2014. And yeah, so two people leave and come back on their own. Warren left on his own accord, I think. J-Mo did not, as far as I know. And then J-Mo comes back. He was with them till the very end, and then Warren comes back in 2001. It is.
Yeah, if we have any questions, here, and you want to take the mic to them?
Sure. So, join in. What questions do folks have?
Are we covering everything?
Lisa Baird does.
So I have a comment and then a question. I apologize for the comment, but it's too perfect not to share this. In October, I was at a conference in Charleston, South Carolina, and it was an annual gathering of thousands of librarians and publishers, mostly from the US, but also from the UK and Europe, and this happens every year in Charleston. And we were at the opening night banquet on the USS Yorktown, which is a former aircraft carrier that's now a really cool museum docked in Charleston Bay. Huge space, lots of food, shrimp and grits, barbecue, the whole 9 yards, and a band, very young men. And I was busy talking, it was really loud, and the band starts playing, and they're an Allman Brothers cover band in Charleston, South Carolina. And I wasn't really paying attention. I was talking to friends. It was to be honest, it was really loud and I was annoyed. But there was a large table of young men, professional men from the UK. And some of them were my friends. And I ran into one of them going to the bathroom, and he was so excited that he was trembling. And he said, "Lisa, do you understand that we never expected to come here to Charleston and hear the Allman Brothers? They were playing deep cuts, the whole thing, and this table of men from the UK, librarians, they were so beside themselves, and their joy made my night. I thought, what more American experience can this be?
There you go.
So why, and I listened to At Fillmore East on my 2-hour drive here today, but why does their music still catch the attention
Still resonate.
of everybody?
Yes. Here, pass the mic. I got some thoughts on that, and so, first of all, I had a fan from Europe write me and say, you were wrong. They were in Europe 3 times, and I only had 2 in the book. I forgot about their 1980 tour when they went there. European fans are starved for Allman Brothers because they eat it up. They love it there. Why does it resonate? I'll say that I spent a lot of time trying to figure out that question for myself. Right? That was literally the whole purpose of this book was me. Like I said, I was doing it for me, and then I realized, well, maybe I'll kick it out into the world. Well, that's not true. I was going to kick it out into the world. That was a given. But their music. And any music that is, I think that is moving the needle and sort of progressive, right, has a foot firmly rooted in the past and one in the present. And when you listen to the Allman Brothers Band, you are hearing strains of music that honestly come from the British Isles originally, right? You know, the American music, which manifests itself mostly in jazz, but in coming out of the South, is merging of two traditions. It's the British, the Western European tradition, and the African tradition coming out of New Orleans and up. It's universal music. I'll leave on this point. I'm gonna say it's the drums, and I'm gonna say why it's the drums very quickly. Number one, in African culture and in Native American cultures, that the drum is that thing. It's the heartbeat. It's the earth, and that is a foundation of music that moves people. Is rhythm. Is the drums. And if you want to hear the difference in the Allman Brothers drums, and I'm just gonna say between like drums and the Allman Brothers drums, just listen to Dickie Betts and Great Southern, and then listen to Enlightened Drugs, which Steve Marshall and I just did driving around South Florida this past week. To me, the difference is that rhythm in those drums. So the music is timeless, but it's also timely. Blues, sung well, speaks to the human condition. We feel what Gregg Allman sings when he sings Whipping Post. I'm gonna tell you, I really felt it when I saw Lamar Williams sing it. There's somebody seeing a black man sing Whipping Post that changes how that song comes out, right? So there's a timelessness of the music. There's the fact that it's exotic and American, but you know, we exported the blues to England, and then Duane and these guys all brought it kind of back. So there's that going on too, you know, and it is distinctly American. This is, my dissertation called it American music, and I couldn't define it other than American music, so I had to drop it. And it's Southern rock, but it's not the Southern rock that comes out of this studio, you know, the different kind that Paul produced a lot of, you know. It's a different sound there. There's a timelessness there. And these guys are virtuosos. They play very well together. They picked the right guys over the years to play with them, to plug in really well. So, you know, I always say the legacy is way more than that record. It's a 45-year career, but 43 years without Duane. That's the legacy of the music. And all these offshoots that have come, and really the offshoots I pay attention to are just who played in the band. Not the kids or any, I mean, I do, but, you know, there is a wealth of, this is a mine of American music. You strike that mine here in this town, and it's just everywhere. So there you go. That's my take on it. I've thought a lot about that.
I know that you want to get it. I want to read this. There were quite a few things that I thought we should share, but this particular one, especially since you were talking from somewhere else. Listeners, and this is about At Fillmore East. Listeners loved the album. On November 10th, 1971, Skryp of Quebec wrote to the band, "Please view this letter of complaint. After spending a small fortune in hard-earned money in amassing a very fine record collection, I recently purchased your new live double LP album. After smoking up some excellent homegrown marijuana, one joint only, I then played your album. My complaint is this: after listening to your beautiful music, the rest of my records seem irrelevant. Thank you very much for a wonderful performance. Hope to see you live. Your dedicated fan, Skryp.
By the way, that letter's from the Big House, and I did research in there. When I say with Bob and Sheila, I went, Richard was working there, Rob Schneck was the director at the time. I'm certain it's something Kirk came up with at some point when he was putting, but again, public archives, museums directly relate to that there.
Wow.
One joint only, by the way.
Wow. Thank you, Karla Heath Sands. Thank you.
Thank you.
Go
I don't
see.
want to keep people.
No, Will Burdell.
I just have one quick question.
My job.
You had a 500-page dissertation. You have a book that's substantially smaller than that. What is the one story or one of the stories that you had to cut at the line that you just had to, and it pained you to make it the size that it is?
You know, so his question was, you know, like, and I put in my notes in my preface, like, there are some things that I left on the cutting room floor. nothing really pained me. What I found a way to do was to tell the stories that I thought were really important. And I did, I cherry-picked quotes. I'm not going to say, and by cherry-picking it means, listen, all of the principals have told this story multiple times. And so finding their best quote that says something is what to do. I got asked a question by a friend. He said, why did you leave out the story of Gregg saying to Duane, so, in Jacksonville, they were playing Trouble No More, and Gregg's like, I can't cut this, and Duane gave them a bunch of crap. And I just wrote, and I said, everybody's told that story. It's a great story. But to me, it was a little more important. The note Dickie Betts said in a documentary I saw where he said, Jesus Christ, what a band. I thought that was a better way of telling the story, right? I left the Layla story on the cutting room floor because I think Layla is important, not because of Duane's collaboration with Eric Clapton. That's important to Eric Clapton, because Eric Clapton never did anything that good again, and I'm on the record saying that at this point. But the big issue, and this came through, was that Duane said no to Eric Clapton. Clapton was going to hire him in the band. He wasn't making anything. He was going to be, as he said repeatedly, farting through silk. And he said no. And the comment I used was J-Mo saying, shit, Eric Clapton should be opening for us. And I feel the same way. And I'm not critiquing Clapton. So that was one of those stories that did not. But there's a lot. When you go back and read, I reread all 3 of those books before I finalized my manuscript to make sure that I grabbed on some things that they hadn't, that I had found in between. And again, I would say, if you haven't, if you like this story, if you can find that Tom Nolan book in words and pictures, you have to get it from Interlibrary Loan. Read Midnight Riders. I think my copy's so dog-eared, it's ridiculous. I have more notes in there and more shit. I've been reading it so long. Alan Paul with One Way Out has just told a great story. And I had to stick with the era. I did not want to get into the sex and the drugs and the money and all that crap. I just share barely merits of mention in my book because I just thought it was too much. So, all right, y'all. I appreciate everybody for sticking around.
Thank you. Wow. John Griffin.
I got one more thing to add as a patron of the studio here. He mentioned Phil Walden. This room you're sitting in is the Phil Walden Memorial Studio. So anybody from out of town who wants a photo op, that's your place.
Hey, we got to give some love to my man back here, Bob Conrad. So every time I come, Bob is here running the show.
Thank you, guys.
On behalf of y'all sitting and on behalf of this legacy, and these guys, that takes nothing away from Richard and John. Lynskey, good friends, and Kirk, and the things they do, but this is a special place, and when I first came here, this was a dump. 26 years ago, this was a disaster. So it is such a joy to be here and experience this with y'all. It means a lot. Laura, I cried yesterday, Doug will tell you, I cried at the end of it, but it wasn't because of you. But I appreciate you having me here. This woman is a gem for your state. The humanities matter.
We've got plenty of food.
I've got books for sale.
We've got a little bit of time left. We've got a little more wine and beer if you want to get some more, and we've got a board meeting tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. We've got breakfast at 8 o'clock at the Hotel 45, and there's a lot going on in town. If people want to get dinner or something like that, we can figure out how to do that at the end of this. But Karla.
So after our meeting tomorrow, if we want to visit the big house, what are the hours?
What are the hours of the big house? Tomorrow.
We're open Thursday through Saturday from 11 to 6, and Sunday is 11 to 4.
And it's on Vineville Avenue.
321, baby.
Y'all, thank you so much.
Appreciate y'all very much.
Appreciate everybody.